For years, Beijing has been broadcasting a very specific message to the world. China now commands the world's largest navy by hull count, boasts cutting-edge stealth fighters like the J-20, and has transformed itself into a legitimate military superpower. The wolf warrior diplomacy, the aggressive patrols in the Taiwan Strait, the massive military parades, all of it projects an image of unstoppable strength. On paper, the numbers look impressive. Over 300 J-20 stealth fighters are in service, a rapidly expanding fleet of Type 052D and Type 055 destroyers, 3 aircraft carriers with a 4th on the way. But here is what is curious. Despite all this chest-thumping, Beijing's rhetoric toward one particular neighbor has become increasingly shrill and desperate. We are talking about Japan, not the United States, not NATO, but Japan. A country that officially maintains a self-defense force rather than a traditional military. A nation that spent decades under constitutional constraints on military development. So why has China's government become so vocal, so aggressive, so seemingly anxious about Japan recently? The answer is not what you might think. It is not about Japan's current order of battle. It is not about how many ships or planes they have right now. What keeps Beijing up at night, what is driving this increasingly desperate rhetoric, is something far more fundamental. It is the realization that when it comes to sustained, high-intensity modern warfare, Japan possesses something China desperately lacks: a genuine military-industrial ecosystem that can win the long war. Today, we are going to examine why China's impressive-looking military might actually be running naked against Japan's quiet, methodical, and devastatingly effective defense posture. By the end, you will understand why Beijing's loud threats are actually the sound of strategic anxiety. Let us start with the most concrete example of Japan's advantage: the F-35 fighter program. China will tell you the J-20 is comparable to America's 5th-generation fighters. They will show impressive footage at air shows and CT specifications that sound competitive. But here is what they will not tell you, and what fundamentally changes the calculus. Japan is not just buying F-35s. Japan is building them, maintaining them, and sustaining them as part of an integrated regional defense industrial base. Japan plans to operate 147 F-35 fighters in total, 105 F-35As, and 42 F-35Bs. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries operates the F-35A final assembly and checkout facility in Nagoya at Komaki South. This is not just a factory. This is a complete industrial ecosystem. What does this mean in practice? It means Japan has complete industrial control over the entire F-35 production process. They know how composite materials are layered. They understand how to maintain them. They control how avionics modules are integrated and tested. They manage the full assembly, calibration, and flight test process. Additionally, Mitsubishi Nagoya was selected to serve as the regional heavy airframe maintenance, repair, overhaul, and upgrade center for the North Asia Pacific region. It gets better. Japan has also built F-135 engine depot capacity through IHI Corporation. This means they can perform major engine overhauls domestically. They can diagnose problems, replace components, and return aircraft to service without waiting for parts from across the Pacific. Now, contrast this with China's J-20 situation. According to sources from within the military-industrial system, the J-20's biggest issue remains unresolved: the domestic engine. Even with the newer WS-15 engine showing progress in 2024, the reality is that these engines are still struggling with reliability and lifespan issues. The stealth coating is delicate, it ages quickly, and maintenance costs are astronomical. Here is the direct consequence. Every time a J-20 is deployed for high-intensity operations, it requires extensive servicing afterward. If these aircraft actually engaged in sustained aerial combat, a significant portion of the fleet would end up grounded for maintenance. This explains why, despite China having hundreds of J-20s officially in service, you almost never see them in the Taiwan Strait or the East China Sea conducting regular operations. It is not that they do not want to show them off, it is that they are too fragile and too maintenance-intensive to actually use operationally at scale. The real question in modern warfare is not how many planes you have on paper. The real question is how many can you actually fly, day after day, week after week, in sustained combat operations. And this is where Japan's F-35 ecosystem becomes devastating. If conflict breaks out, Japan knows exactly where their aircraft are most likely to experience problems. They know how to replace parts quickly. They know how to shift maintenance into combat mode during wartime. With U.S. authorization, Japan's entire automotive and heavy industry production lines could pivot to military production in just weeks. Battle-damaged F-35s could be repaired and returned to the front lines at an accelerated pace that China simply cannot match. This is the real gap in war potential. It is not about who has more planes on paper. It is about who has the capability to keep those planes flying when it matters most. This brings us to the second critical flaw in China's position: sortie generation capacity. In modern air warfare, victory does not go to whoever has the most aircraft sitting on the tarmac. Victory goes to whoever can generate the most combat sorties, actual combat missions, consistently over time. Let's look at pilot training and operational experience. Japanese pilots, after decades of Cold War experience, have consistently trained with the U.S. military for interception and air defense drills. Japanese pilots graduate from flight school and are immediately trained to NATO standards. They participate in regular joint exercises with American forces. They practice real-world scenarios constantly. The Chinese military, by contrast, despite years of hard training for near-real combat scenarios, has never fought a real modern high-intensity air superiority battle. Not once in the 70-plus years since the founding of the People's Republic. The last significant naval engagement was in 1974 in the Paracel Islands, where small gunboats essentially threw grenades at each other. This is not hyperbole. This is documented history. In terms of logistical support, combat experience, and joint operation systems, Japan speaks the same language as the U.S. military. The Chinese military is still trying to coordinate within its own services. This matters enormously when you are trying to generate hundreds of combat sorties per week under pressure. But here is the deeper issue. Even if China could theoretically match Japan's sortie rate initially, could they sustain it? Every sortie requires fuel, weapons, maintenance, spare parts, and pilot rest cycles. Japan has a proven supply chain. China is still building theirs and is doing so under a system where political considerations often override operational requirements. The question is not whether China can put on an impressive display during a parade or a short exercise. The question is, can they maintain operational tempo for weeks or months in a real shooting war? The evidence suggests they cannot, at least not at the level required to overcome Japan's integrated air defense system. Now let us talk about what might be China's most serious vulnerability: anti-submarine warfare. This is where Japan's advantage becomes almost comical in its totality. For decades, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force has done one thing exceptionally well: tracking submarines. During the Cold War, they worked closely with the United States military, monitoring Soviet submarine activity throughout the Pacific. They have been doing this continuously for over 50 years. The result is clear. Japan knows every ocean current, every thermocline layer, every underwater geographic feature in the Western Pacific better than they know the palm of their hand. They have databases containing the acoustic signatures of every major Chinese naval vessel. The propeller sounds, the engine vibration frequencies, the machinery noise patterns, all cataloged and analyzed. The moment a Chinese-type 055 destroyer starts its engines and begins moving out of port, Japan's submarines and sonar networks know exactly what is happening. Distance, bearing, speed, even the specific ship, all identified almost instantaneously. But here is where it gets truly asymmetric. While China can see Japanese surface ships with satellites and radar, just as Japan can see Chinese surface ships, the underwater picture is completely one-sided. Japan's submarines can easily detect Chinese submarines. Chinese submarines cannot reliably detect Japanese ones. Take Japan's Taigai-class submarines, for example. These boats incorporate lithium-ion batteries instead of traditional lead-acid batteries. This technology provides improved submerged endurance and performance. More importantly, these submarines are so quiet they have earned the nickname oceanic black holes among naval professionals. Their noise signature is so low it blends with the background noise of the ocean itself. To Chinese sonar operators, all they hear is waves, fish, and currents. They literally cannot distinguish the submarine from ocean noise. Now imagine this scenario in actual combat. A Chinese submarine is suddenly hit by a torpedo. The hull cracks, water rushes in. The vessel begins to sink. At that moment, the commander still does not know who attacked them or where the attack came from. That is not a hypothetical, that is the reality of Japan's undersea advantage. Some might argue that China has anti-submarine capabilities, towed sonar arrays on the Type O-55 destroyers, anti-submarine helicopters in the air. But here's the brutal reality. Having the equipment does not mean you can use it effectively. Japan knows the hydrology, the topography, the sea conditions throughout the first island chain. They know the salinity levels and thermocline layers. Sonar waves bend and refract in water, and Japanese submarine captains know exactly at which depth to position their boats so that sonar waves slide right past them. In the Western Pacific, Japan knows exactly where the deep trenches are and where to hide. The Chinese Navy, by comparison, is a relative newcomer, operating in waters where Japan has 5 decades of accumulated knowledge and experience. This is not just a technological gap, it is an experiential chasm that cannot be closed quickly. Here is something that has changed dramatically in just the past few years. Japan is no longer playing defense only. They are developing serious strike-back and counter-strike capabilities that fundamentally alter the strategic equation. Japan is accelerating its drive toward approximately 2% of GDP in defense spending, arriving at that milestone earlier than originally planned. Their 2025 defense budget emphasizes long-range standoff systems, weapons that can hit targets from hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. The concrete details are striking. Japan has signed agreements to acquire up to 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles, with deliveries planned across fiscal years 2025 to 2027. 400 Tomahawks. Think about what that means. These are subsonic cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 1,600 kilometers, capable of precision strikes against land and sea targets. But Japan is not stopping there. They are also accelerating deployment of extended-range Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles, with variants reaching approximately 1,000-kilometer class range. These domestically produced missiles can target Chinese naval vessels far from Japanese shores. Why does this matter? Because it means Japan no longer has to wait for Chinese forces to approach Japanese territory. They can hold Chinese naval bases, ports, and staging areas at risk from the opening moments of any conflict. Chinese ships leaving port are vulnerable before they even reach international waters. This fundamentally changes Beijing's calculation. Any attack on Japan now means immediately exposing Chinese military infrastructure to long-range precision strikes. The risk-to-reward ratio has shifted dramatically against China. This brings us to the deepest and most fundamental problem China faces: the difference between a military built for display and a military built for sustained warfare. China's military procurement is often driven by political timelines and propaganda needs. We saw this clearly with the Fujian aircraft carrier rushed into service with minimal testing to meet political deadlines. We see it with the J-20, where impressive airshow performances matter more than actual operational sustainability. Japan's approach is the opposite. It is quiet, methodical, and focused on genuine capability rather than appearance. Japan's defense industry is not trying to win propaganda points. It is trying to build a system that can absorb punishment and keep fighting. Consider the broader defense industrial picture. Japan has been loosening arms export constraints and pushing deeper into co-development and production partnerships with allies. This aligns with a broader strategy to build a more resilient domestic and allied supply base. The goal is clear: create a defense industrial ecosystem that can surge production during wartime. Japan's automotive industry, electronics industry, precision manufacturing sector, all of these can be rapidly converted to military production if necessary. The machine tools, the skilled workforce, the supply chains, the quality control systems, they are all already there, just producing civilian goods in peacetime. This is what Beijing truly fears, not the 240,000 personnel of the Japan Self-Defense Forces on paper. What they fear is that once war begins, Japan's millions of skilled industrial workers could almost overnight shift from producing cars and electronics to producing weapons and military equipment. This is the same industrial logic the United States used to defeat Japan in World War II. And now Japan has learned that lesson and is prepared to use it against China. So let's connect the dots. Why has Beijing's rhetoric toward Japan become so aggressive, so personal, so desperate sounding? Look at the recent pattern. First, there is the dangerous behavior. Chinese Coast Guard and Navy vessels have used fire control radar locks on Japanese ships in international waters. In military terms, that is like unlocking the safety on a gun. It is a near act of war. But why do it? Because China feels it needs to intimidate Japan through shows of force, having failed to achieve genuine military superiority. Then there are the bizarre personal attacks on Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. When she stated clearly that a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency, Beijing's response was not diplomatic pushback. It was a coordinated character assassination campaign. The People's Daily, the Foreign Ministry, and state media all mobilized to personally attack a foreign politician, even suggesting she is not fit to be prime minister. Why react so strongly to a simple statement of treaty obligations? Because Takaichi exposed the script Xi Jinping fears most. If war breaks out in the Taiwan Strait, Japan will not be a spectator. It will be a combatant under the United States and Japan's security treaty. Then there are the live fire exercises in the Yellow Sea, claimed to be the largest in 5 years. There were large no-fly zones, target ships blown up, and state media headlines screaming about arrows leaving quivers. But here is the tell. If you analyze who these exercises are really for, it becomes clear they are not meant to intimidate Japan or the United States. They are meant for domestic consumption. Beijing needs those red zones on maps and dramatic explosions on television to cover up the unspoken fear revealed in their internal war game simulations. And what do those simulations show? According to multiple defense analysts and policy experts familiar with Chinese strategic thinking, the conclusion is always the same. Once the United States and Japan combine forces, China has no realistic chance of victory in the first island chain. The sortie generation gap, the undersea disadvantage, the industrial depth disparity, it all adds up to a scenario Beijing cannot win. So what is the bottom line here? China's threat to Japan is not really about current hardware counts. It is not about whether the J-20 looks impressive in promotional videos or whether Chinese destroyers look sleek cutting through the water during exercises. The real assessment comes down to this. Japan possesses the combination of F-35 sustainment capacity, undersea competence, long-range strike modernization, and United States integrated industrial logistics that could decisively win a prolonged, high-intensity conflict. China, for all its apparent strength, has built a military optimized for short-term displays of power rather than sustained warfare. Japan's advantage is not a secret weapon or a technological wonder. It is something more fundamental and more difficult to counter. A complete system built on decades of experience, careful planning, alliance integration, and industrial depth. Beijing knows this. That is why their rhetoric grows louder even as their actual military options become more constrained. That is why they are so desperate to avoid any scenario where Japan becomes a full combatant. That is why they attack Japanese politicians who state obvious facts about treaty obligations. The wolf warrior howl is not the sound of strength. It is the sound of a regime that has done the math and realized that in any sustained conflict, their impressive-looking navy would be, as we said at the beginning, essentially running naked against an opponent that can see everything, sustain everything, and outlast everything China can throw at it. To quote what United States defense officials have privately observed, Beijing is willing to fight Japan, but only without United States intervention. And they know that is not a scenario they can guarantee. The moment the alliance between the United States and Japan activates fully, the entire strategic picture changes. And China loses. That's not propaganda. That's not Western bias. That's the cold calculus of industrial warfare, alliance integration, and operational sustainability. And that's why, despite all the aggressive posturing, Beijing's actual behavior remains carefully calibrated to stay just short of the line that would trigger a real conflict. Because deep down, they know what the outcome would be. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into military technology and geopolitical strategy. Thanks for watching.